The hand hit my chest before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, and it hit hard enough to move me, which almost nobody manages on the first try. "Out of my face, civilian, before I put you on the ground." I took the shove. I let it walk me back off the personnel ramp, one boot heel finding the lip of the concrete, my weight settling low, the way weight settles when a body has been taught, over many years and at real cost, to keep its feet. I did not lift my arms. I did not set them. I stood where the push put me, on the cold apron below the ramp, and I looked at the young man who had decided, in the 4 seconds since I appeared at his gate, that he already knew exactly who I was. "This compound's for real operators," he said, louder now, because there was a line behind me, and a line is an audience. "Not lost girls." It was 6:40 in the morning. I had been awake for something close to 30 hours. I had come off a flight, and then a second flight, and then a gray van that smelled of old coffee and diesel, and I had walked the last half-mile on foot with a single worn duffel over one shoulder, because I wanted the walk, because I had wanted to come up on the place slowly, the way you come up on a house you used to live in and are not sure will remember you. I was wearing a plain jacket and plain trousers and boots that had crossed more countries than the corporal in front of me had years. There was nothing on me that said what I was. That was the point of the clothes. It had also, it seemed, become the problem. The air smelled of pine and cut grass and the particular cold of a coastal morning that has not decided yet whether it will warm. Gulls were working somewhere off past the motor pool. A flag on a pole by the shack ticked against its halyard in a wind I could barely feel. All of it was familiar in the way a smell is familiar, straight past the thinking part of the brain and into something older, and I had been standing in it for perhaps 10 seconds, letting it land, when the corporal stepped into my path and decided I did not belong in it. I looked at him, and I did not say the thing that would have ended his morning. I have carried a heavier weight than his hand up a mountain that I am still not allowed to name out loud, and I had learned, on that mountain and in the years around it, that the loudest person at a gate is almost never the most dangerous one standing there. So I let the hand land. I kept my feet, and I said, in the voice I use when I am asking a room to do something it does not want to do, quiet and level and without any edge on it at all, "I need to reach the desk and make a call." That was the rupture, if you want to think of the morning in pieces. The part where something happens that should never have happened, from someone whose regard should have been automatic, and the person it happens to does not react the way the room expects. I did not know yet that the truth was already inside the building. I only knew it was there, the way you know a room is occupied by the light under the door, and that it did not need me to raise my hand for it. The corporal's name, I would learn in a few minutes, was Iverson. He was maybe 24. He had the kind of new that has not been anywhere yet. The shine still on him, the certainty still whole, the certainty that comes from having been told you are elite before you have been tested enough to know what the word costs. He wore his military police brassard like a man who believed the letters made him tall. He had a good jaw and a bad temper, and the specific swagger of someone guarding a place far more serious than he was. Behind him, at the shack, a second one hung back, younger even, a lance corporal with a face that had started to understand something was off before his corporal had. He kept glancing at me and then away, the way you glance at a dog that is too calm, the way an animal will look at weather it does not have a word for. "Corporal," the lance corporal said. "Corporal, maybe just let her talk to the desk." Iverson did not look at him. He looked at me, and he reached for the radio on his shoulder, and I understood he was about to call me in as a trespasser, a woman who had wandered up to the wire and would not leave. I let him reach. I set my duffel down in my boot, slow, both hands visible, because when you have spent your life being the most capable person in a place that refuses to see it, you learn to keep your hands where frightened men can watch them. He fumbled the transmit key. His thumb missed it once. I noticed that and filed it, the way I file everything without meaning to. "Ma'am," he said, and he put a sneer on the word, made it the opposite of respect. "You have got about 5 seconds to pick up your bag and walk back the way you came before this becomes a very bad morning for you." "It is already a bad morning," and I said. "I just do not think it is bad for me." He did not know what to do with that, so he did what men who do not know what to do often do, which is get louder. "I want to tell you about the stillness, because it is the part people misunderstand. They think it is meekness. They think a woman who takes a shove and does not shove back has been broken into something small. It is the opposite. The Corps spent a great deal of money and a great deal of somebody's time teaching me exactly when to move and exactly when not to. A man's ego at a gate was not on the list of things worth moving for. Stillness is not the absence of a response. Stillness is a response. It is the most expensive one I own, and I had bought it at a price the line behind me could not have guessed. There is a thing that happens to your sense of time when you have been in the places I have been. It slows down, and it clarifies. On that ramp, in the 10 or 15 seconds after the shove, I had all the time in the world. I could see the corporal's pulse in his throat, quick, too quick for the situation, a man running hot over nothing. I could see the lance corporal's weight shift onto the balls of his feet. I could see, without turning my head, the shape of the line behind me. 6 or 7 people, a couple of contractors with badges, a staff sergeant with a coffee, a civilian delivery driver who had stopped his hand truck to watch. None of them were a threat. The only heat in the whole picture came off the young man in front of me, and heat like that burns the person carrying it long before it burns anyone else. I stood on that apron, and I let the corporal make his noise, and inside my own quiet, I did the thing I always do, which is to take inventory of what the world cannot see. Under my left sleeve, there is a scar that runs from the wrist toward the elbow. Pale now, a souvenir of a night I do not describe. My hands, if you watch them, stayed open and loose, fingers slightly curled, the resting shape of hands that know they might be needed. Somewhere in the back of my skull, without any effort at all, a part of me had already counted the exits, mapped the vehicles, clocked the second Marine stance, and found it honest, and decided that the only danger in the whole tableau was a young man's certainty, which is a danger mostly to the young man. That is who I am, and it is the gap that ran the whole morning, the distance between the lost girl the corporal saw and the operator standing on his ramp. He saw travel clothes and a duffel and a woman who was tired. He did not see a Marine. He certainly did not see a raider. There was no way for him to see it, and that, in a strange way, was the point of everything I had spent 19 years becoming. You're not supposed to see it. If you can see it coming, I have failed at the job. A woman who walks up on a gate and reads instantly as an operator is a woman who has already lost the only advantage that matters. The travel clothes were not a disguise. They were the truth of the work. The work is to be the quiet thing in the corner that the loud men wave past. I let him keep talking. I thought, not unkindly, that he had no idea he was standing next to the answer to his own question, and that in about 90 seconds, the answer was going to arrive whether he wanted it or not. And there was nothing I needed to do to make it come, except stand still and let it. The dismissal was not new. That was the part that kept it from touching me. If it had been the first time, it might have found some soft place and lodged there. But I had been called support for so long that when a corporal called me a lost girl, it did not even sound original. It sounded like a rerun of a show I had stopped watching years ago. Support. That was the word for the first 10 years. I enlisted at 18, in 2007, into a field that lived behind screens and inside headsets, the intelligence and communications work that keeps the men at the front alive and gets none of the credit for it. I was good at it. I was better than good at it. I could take a mess of intercepts and traffic and thin scraps of pattern and tell a commander hours ahead where the danger was going to come from and roughly when, and I was right often enough that they started scheduling around me without ever quite admitting they were doing it. And every year, in one form or another, some version of the corporal in front of me looked at me and decided that the work I did was not the real work, that I was near the war but not of it, that I was, in the phrase I heard more times than I can count, not a warfighter. Just support. I made sergeant meritoriously in 2012. I deployed twice before anyone let me carry anything heavier than a radio, and both times I watched men who could not read terrain as well as I could tell me to stay in the truck. So I stayed in the truck. I got very good at staying in the truck and at knowing, from inside the truck, exactly how the fight outside it was going to go. And being right and being told afterward that of course I was right, that was my job, sitting in the truck. There is a specific kind of tired that comes from being consistently correct in a place where correctness is credited to the furniture. I carried that tired for 10 years. It taught me patience, the way a long march teaches you your feet. There was a night, early on, that I think of as the shape of all of it. A raid was going sideways 2 provinces away, and I was the one who had called it, hours before, from a pile of intercepts a captain had told me to stop wasting his time with. I had written the assessment anyway. I had put my name on it. And when the night went exactly the way I said it would, that same captain stood in the operations tent and briefed my assessment back to the room as if it had grown in his own head overnight. And nobody corrected him, least of all me, because correcting him was not the job. The job was the assessment, and the assessment was right, and being right was supposed to be enough. I went outside and stood in the cold and let myself be furious for exactly as long as it took to smoke nothing and watch nothing, and then I put the fury away in the drawer where I keep such things, and I went back in, And I did it again the next night and the night after that. You learn if you live like that long enough that the work does not care who gets the credit. The work only cares whether it was done. That is either the loneliest thing I know or the most freeing one, and most days I still cannot tell you which. Then, in 2016, the doors that had been closed for my whole career came off their hinges, and in 2017, I walked through one. I went to assessment and selection at 28, older than most of the men in my class, and I did not tell anyone why I was there or what I had done to earn the slot, and I let them assume I would quit. There is a look men give you at the start of a thing like that says they have already written the day you will ring the bell and go home. I have made a kind of career out of that look. I did not quit. I finished the course. I earned the military occupational specialty that made me a critical skills operator, which is the long and formal way of saying I became a raider, and I put on staff sergeant. And for the first time in a decade, the word support did not follow me into a room. The men who called me a lost girl had no way to know any of that. But my body knew it. My body had earned the right to stand on that ramp and take a shove without flinching, and it stood on that right like a floor that has been load-tested and will not give. I want to tell you about Alvarado now because you cannot understand why a shove did not move me without understanding the valley, and you cannot understand the valley without understanding him. His name was Jesse Alvarado. He was a corporal too once, the same rank as the boy who pushed me, and I have thought about that symmetry more than I would like. He was small and quick and had a laugh that did not fit his body. Too big for him, the laugh of a much larger and much happier man. He came onto the team the year I did. He was the kind of Marine who did not look like the recruiting posters. If you had seen him in a coffee line in his civilian clothes, you would have walked past him 100 times and never once thought, that man will one day be the best of us. He told me that himself, near the beginning, when I was still proving I belonged, and he was one of the few who had decided, without fuss, that I already did. The people who look least like it, he said one night, cleaning gear neither of us needed to clean, just to have something for our hands, are the ones you want on your left. He meant himself. I understood later that he also meant me. It was the closest he came to telling me he had my back, and it was more than enough, because on a team the real language is never the big words. It is the small ones, offered sideways, while your hands are busy with something else. He made me promise something too, on a good day, one of the ordinary ones you do not know to hold on to until they are the last of their kind. We had pulled a man out of a bad spot that afternoon, nothing dramatic, a stuck vehicle and a nervous crowd and a lot of careful patience, and afterward Jesse was quiet for a while, and then he said, "Promise me you always go back for people, whatever it costs. You are the one who will still be thinking clearly when the rest of us are not. So promise." I promised. You make promises like that lightly, in the good hours, not knowing they are the beams the rest of your life will hang from. He had a photograph he kept, not of a person, of a place, a stretch of ordinary coast where he said he was going to build a boat when all of this was over, a boat he did not know how to build and had no plan for learning. He showed it to everyone at least once. It was a joke, and it was not a joke. He was the kind of man who needed a thing on the far side of the war to walk toward, and the boat was his. Ridiculous and unbuilt and completely serious. I have thought about that boat more times than I have thought about most of the medals in most of the drawers I have ever seen. When people ask me, the ones who are allowed to ask, what we lose when we lose someone like that, I do not tell them about capability, or years of training, or the tactical cost, though those are all real. I tell them about the boat. We lose the boat. We lose every unbuilt boat on every quiet stretch of coast a good person was walking toward, and the arithmetic of that never comes out even, and I have stopped trying to make it. In the spring of 2020, we went into a valley I am not permitted to describe, for reasons that will still be reasons long after I'm gone, and the day went wrong in the specific and total way that days go wrong in places like that. I will not give you the details. This is not the kind of story where the details are the point, and the men who were there deserve better than to have their worst hours turned into a scene for strangers. I will tell you only this. When it was over, I came down out of the rocks carrying Jesse Alvarado, and I kept the promise he had made me make on a much better day, which was that I would always come back for people, and I brought him home, and he did not come home the way either of us wanted. They gave me a decoration for it. It was awarded quietly, in a room without cameras, and the citation for it lives in a file most people will never open. I do not wear the ribbon where anyone can read it. I have never told the story at a party. When the corporal on the ramp called me a lost girl, the only thing in the whole world that could have made me answer him was standing in a file drawer inside the building behind him. And it was not the medal. It was the promise. The medal is metal. The promise is the only decoration that ever meant anything, and I keep it by coming back for people, and I intended to keep coming back for people for the rest of my life, including, as it would turn out before the day was over, for the boy who shoved me. So I stood on the apron, 30 hours awake, a valley in my chest, and a corporal calling me a lost girl, and I breathed out slow, and I thought, a shove is nothing next to a valley, nothing. It does not even register on the same instrument. The needle does not move. The ground changed, and it did not change, because I made it change. I want to be precise about this because it is the part of the morning I am most at peace with. I did not reveal myself. I did not draw myself up and announce a rank. I did not produce the citation or say the name of the valley or do any of the things a smaller version of me might have done to win the ramp. The thing that turned the morning did not come from me at all. It came out of the building, over a radio, in another man's voice, and I only stood there and let it arrive. Inside the compound, there is a room where the camera feeds live, and in that room, that morning, sat a master sergeant named Griffin Yates. Yates and I had been on a team together in the years before the valley. He was the kind of man who noticed things, which is why he had the watch and why he was the one who happened to glance at the gate monitor at exactly the wrong moment for Corporal Iverson and exactly the right moment for me. I did not see any of this happen. I reconstructed it later, from Yates himself, over coffee, the way you reconstruct the parts of your own story that happened out of your sight. He told me he looked up at the feed and saw a woman get shoved off the personnel ramp, and he told me he almost looked away because people get turned around at gates all the time, and it is not the watch chief's problem to referee every misunderstanding at the wire. And then, he said, he saw the way the woman took the shove. He saw her keep her feet. He saw her set her hands where they could be watched. He saw her not react, and he told me that the not reacting was what made him lean forward because in 19 years he had only ever seen a handful of people stand exactly that still while a man put hands on them. And he had served with most of them, and he had buried some of them. And one of them, he realized, leaning closer to the screen until his nose was almost against it, was standing at his gate in travel clothes with a duffel at her boot. He said my name out loud to an empty watch floor to be sure of it. Then he keyed the net. The radio on Iverson's shoulder crackled, and Yates's voice came out of it flat and fast and unmistakably in command. All posts, main personnel gate. That's a raider. Stand down. Do not touch her. I say again, stand down. I heard it the way the corporal heard it, out of the little speaker at his collar, tinny and small and enormous. I watched it reach him. There is a moment when the truth arrives over a radio where a man hears the words before he understands them, and you can see the two things happen separately on his face, the hearing, and then, a half second behind it, the understanding, catching up like thunder catching up to lightning. The radio does not care about a man's pride. It only carries the truth, and it does not soften it on the way. His hand, which had been half raised toward me, either to point or to push again, stopped in the air. It just stopped and hung there, and did not know what to do with itself. The line behind me went quiet in the particular way a crowd goes quiet when it realizes it has been watching the wrong story the whole time, that the person it had cast as the fool was never the fool at all. I did not smile. I want you to know that. There was nothing in me that wanted to enjoy it. I felt, if anything, tired and a little sad, and very far from a valley, and I watched a young man's certainty begin to come apart at a gate, and I felt the way you feel watching weather move in that you cannot stop and did not ask for. What happened next was the squeeze, and it happened, as it usually does, inside the person doing the squeezing. Iverson tried to save his own face. It is a human thing to do, and I do not hold it against him, though it made the next 90 seconds worse for him than they needed to be. He looked at the radio, and he looked at me, and he reached, the way a falling man reaches for a branch, for the one thing he still thought he held, which was the rulebook. That, he said, and his voice had lost some of its floor. That doesn't mean anything. Anybody can say that over a radio. I need to see identification, regulations. Nobody comes through this gate without I see a card. Behind him, the lance corporal, Petrie, had already come to a kind of attention, his body ahead of his understanding, his spine having decided before his mind did that the situation had changed. He was looking at me now with something close to horror. The specific horror of a young man who realizes he stood next to a thing going wrong and did not stop it, and who is old enough to know it will follow him for a while. I looked at Iverson, and I felt the pull. I want to be honest with you about that, because the stories that pretend there is no pull are lying to you. There was a sentence available to me. It was short, and it was true, and if I had said it on that ramp in front of that line, it would have taken the young man apart at the joints and left the pieces on the concrete for the morning shift to step over. I knew the sentence. I could feel its shape in my mouth. It would have felt, for about 4 seconds, extraordinarily good, and then it would have felt like nothing, and then it would have felt like something I did not want to own. I measured it against the valley, which is what I measure everything against, and I set it down. He was reaching for the rulebook the way a drowning man reaches for a branch, and I let him hold it, because it was the kindest thing within reach. I moved my hand, slowly, both of us watching it go, not toward a weapon and not toward a comeback, but into the inner pocket of my jacket, and I took out my identification, and I handed it to him the way you hand a frightened man something breakable, flat across my palm, no snap to it, no theater. "Read it," I said. "Take your time. There is no hurry now." I had already decided, standing on that ramp, what kind of morning this was going to be. I decided it in the space of one breath, somewhere between the radio and my hand reaching for my pocket, and once I had decided it, I felt the calm come down over me that comes down before any movement I have trained for. The stillness that is not fear and is not anger, but is simply knowing, with your whole body, exactly what you are and are not going to do. I was not going to take his career. I want to be clear that he had not earned the pass. A man who puts hands on someone because of how they are dressed has done a thing that ought to cost him, and I am not one of those people who believes every cruelty should be met with a lecture and a hug. If the calculus had been about what Iverson deserved, the calculus would have gone badly for Iverson. But it was not about that. I have buried a better man than the anger the corporal stirred in me, and I was not going to spend that grief, which is the most valuable thing I own, on a boy at a gate who did not yet know what a gate was for. Grief like that is not for spending, it is for keeping, and keeping it meant not letting him make me into the kind of person who ends people because she can, and the moment is there. He read the card. I watched his eyes move across it, once, fast, and then again, slow, and I watched them stop on the rank, and then on the words that follow the rank on a card like mine, and I watched the last of the shine go off him. He was very young. His hand had started very slightly to shake, and he was trying to hold the card still so that I would not see it. And of course that made it worse. The way trying to hold anything still, when you are afraid, always makes it worse. I leaned in, half a step, and I said it low, only for him, under the level where the line could hear. "You are going to stand there," I said, "and you are going to breathe. Nobody's ending today. You and I are going to talk this afternoon, and it is not going to be the conversation you are bracing for. Right now, Corporal, just breathe. In through the nose. That is all I am asking you for." He breathed. It was not steady, but it was breathing, and it was the first thing I had asked him to do that he actually managed. Something behind his eyes, which had been bracing for the blow, did not know what to do with the fact that the blow was not coming, and that not knowing is where, if you are patient, a person can actually be reached. Then the reckoning arrived, and it arrived the way I always want these things to arrive, which is on its own 2 feet, without my having to raise my voice for it. Staff Sergeant Kilgore reached the gate first, at a run. He was the guard supervisor, the man whose corporal had just put hands on a raider on camera, and word travels fast down a chain when the word is bad. He came around the shack, still buttoning the collar of his camis, and he took in the whole scene in one sweep, the woman on the apron, the duffel, the card in his corporal's shaking hand, and I watched him read the name off the card from 6 feet away and go the specific gray that men go when they understand the size of what has happened on their watch and how much of it is now theirs to answer for. "Gunnery Sergeant Devlin," he said, and his voice cracked on the rank. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." He turned on Iverson without waiting for me to answer. "Corporal, step back from her now. Hands at your sides. Do not say another word." Iverson stepped back. Petrie was already back, practically at the wall of the shack, standing straighter than I had ever seen a lance corporal stand, wishing, I think, to be absorbed into the cinder block. And then Yates came out through the gate. He came out the way you come toward someone you had, somewhere in the private part of yourself, half stopped expecting to see again. He was bigger than I remembered, and grayer than I remembered, and he walked straight through the middle of the whole frozen tableau, as if the corporal and the staff sergeant and the line were furniture, and he stopped in front of me. And for a second, neither of us said anything, because there is a kind of recognition that is too old for the first words to be small ones. His eyes were doing something I chose not to name for him. Out of respect, because a man is allowed his own weather. "Devlin," he said. Then he said, "My call sign," the one from the team, the one I had not heard out loud in almost 3 years. And he said it the way you say the name of someone the mountain was supposed to have kept. "We thought you were still on the far side of the world." "I got in this morning," I said. My voice, I noticed, was not entirely steady either. 30 hours in a valley and an old friend will do that. "Welcome home, Raider," he said. And he said it loud enough for the line to hear, and I understood he had done it on purpose, that he was a man who noticed things, and he had noticed exactly what needed to happen for the morning to land where it should. He was telling all of them, the corporal and the lance corporal and the staff sergeant and the whole watching line, exactly who they had just watched get shoved off a ramp and call it nothing. The reckoning did not need me to say a word. It walked out of the building on its own 2 feet, and it called me by my name, and the ramp, which 90 seconds before had been a place where a lost girl got pushed, was silent, and every face on it had rearranged. And Corporal Iverson stood at rigid attention now, staring down at the card in his hand as if he were waiting for the letters on it to rearrange themselves into something he could survive. I took the card back gently. There was no reason to take it any other way. The aftermath moved through the place the way water moves through a building, finding every room, going where it will regardless of anyone's plans for it. By the time the sun was fully up, the company commander knew. Lieutenant Colonel Barrow came down to the gate himself, which he did not have to do, and he came down with the particular quiet of a senior officer who is angry on behalf of someone else and is holding it very carefully so as not to spill it on the wrong person. He shook my hand. He held it a beat longer than a handshake, which from Barrow was a speech. Then he looked at the guard shack, where Iverson stood at attention, certain his life was over, and Barrow's jaw did a thing I recognized, the small forward set that means a man has already written a paragraph in his head and is deciding whether to say it. "Say the word, Gunny," Barrow said, low so only I could hear, turning his shoulder to the gate so the words stayed between us. "And he's gone by lunch, non-judicial administrative separation, whatever you want on the menu. He put hands on you at my gate, on camera, in front of half the morning shift. That is not a gray area. Say the word, and I will make it disappear him." I have thought about that offer many times since. There is a version of me, a younger version, a version who had not yet come down out of the rocks with Jesse Alvarado on her back, who would have said the word. She would have said it and felt righteous and been technically correct. I am not that version anymore. The valley took her and gave me back somebody quieter, somebody who has learned that being correct and being right are not always the same country. "Sir," I said, respectfully, "do not take his career, take his certainty, give the rest to me." Barrow looked at me for a long moment. He was old enough and good enough to understand what I was asking, which was harder than punishment and worth more, and also to be a little irritated by it, because punishment is clean and paperwork is finite, and what I was asking for was neither. "He does not deserve that," Barrow said. "No, sir," I said, "he does not. That is what makes it worth doing. If he deserved it, it would just be a transaction." Barrow let out a breath through his nose, and something in his shoulders came down, and he nodded. Once, and that was the corporal's career decided, standing on an apron in a conversation the corporal never heard and would not learn the shape of for a long time, if ever. Then Theo Marsh found me. Marsh had been my communicator for years, the voice in my ear on more bad nights than I can count, the man who talked me through the dark parts with nothing but a calm voice and a map he could not see. And he came pushing through the knot of people at the gate, grinning and blinking too fast, and he did not salute or come to attention or do any of the things the corporal was doing. He grabbed me by both shoulders and looked at me like a man confirming a rumor he had been afraid to believe, afraid because believing it and being wrong would have cost him something. "You let a boot corporal shove you," he said. You could have folded that kid up like a road map and mailed him home in an envelope." "I have folded enough people, Theo," I said. "I came home to stop." He laughed, the wet kind, the kind that is standing in for something it does not have words for, and pulled me into the sort of greeting that told the whole gate, more completely than Yates's radio call had, exactly what I was worth to the men who had worked beside me. An hour before, a stranger had shoved me off a ramp and called me a lost girl. Now a man who had followed me into places without names was holding on to me at a gate like proof of something he had needed proof of. That contrast was the whole morning. That contrast was, I think, the whole point of everything, if a morning like that has a point, which I am still not sure it does. Maybe it just has a shape, and we call the shape a point so we can carry it. The line, by then, had mostly moved on, the way lines do, people remembering they had places to be and jobs to reach, and only carrying the story with them as something to tell later. But a few of them lingered, and I caught the delivery driver, the civilian with the hand truck, looking at me with an expression I have learned to recognize and have never gotten comfortable with. It was not quite awe. It was closer to apology, the apology of a stranger who watched something unfair happen to you and did nothing, and who now understands the person they failed to speak up for did not need speaking up for at all, and feels somehow worse for it. I gave him a small nod, the kind that says, "It is fine," that says, "You were not the one who shoved me," that says, "Go on to your day." He nodded back and pushed his hand truck up the ramp, and I thought about how many people go their whole lives being the one at the back of the line who watched and said nothing, and how the shame of that is its own quiet teacher, and how, if he was lucky, the morning would make him braver the next time he saw someone getting pushed. That is the only good a thing like this does for the bystanders. It does not make them feel better. It makes them, if they let it, a little harder to keep silent. Over by the shack, Iverson waited, released from attention now, but not from dread, certain, the way only the very young are certain, that the axe was coming and coming soon. When Kilgore told him, finally, that he was not being processed, that he was not being discharged, that he was instead to report to Gunnery Sergeant Devlin at 1400 hours, the corporal's face did a thing I have seen on the faces of people who brace all their weight against a door that turns out to open the other way. He nearly fell through the space where the punishment was supposed to be. He looked for a moment more frightened by the mercy than he had been by the threat, which is the correct response, and told me more about him than anything he had said out loud. I did not stay to watch. I had somewhere to be inside myself first. There is a cost to all of it, and I sat with the cost in an empty ready room while the base woke up around me. The adrenaline drained out the way it always does, late and all at once, leaving the shakes behind it. The fine tremor in the hands that comes not during the thing, but after. When the body finally understands it is allowed to be afraid retroactively. I sat on a bench in a room full of gear that was not mine yet, in a compound that had turned over its whole roster while I was gone, and I felt the specific loneliness that nobody warns you about, which is the loneliness of finally being recognized. Everyone at that gate learned my name this morning. That is what I kept thinking, turning it over. Everyone learned my name on the exact same morning that I remembered, all at once. Every person who had already known it and was not here to see me come home. Yates was here. Marsh was here. But the team is not a fixed thing. It loses people. It had lost Alvarado in a valley, and it had lost others in the years since, to other valleys and to roadside afternoons and to the slow attrition of a life like this. And you stand in the middle of that arithmetic, and you feel both famous and forgotten at once, celebrated by strangers and unseen by the only ones whose seeing you would have traded all of it for. Being right at the gate had not made me whole. I want to say that plainly, because there is a lie that these stories sometimes tell, that the reckoning fixes it, that when the radio crackles and the room rearranges, the wound closes and the credits roll. It does not. The reckoning cleared me. It did not heal me. Those are different operations, done by different instruments, and confusing them is how people end up chasing recognition for the rest of their lives, thinking the next room that finally sees them will be the one that finally fills the hole. It never is. The radio gave me back my name in front of strangers. It could not give me back the man I carried down out of the rocks, and it was his voice, not the corporal's, that I heard in the empty ready room, telling me again that the people who look least like it are the ones you want on your left. While I sat there, Yates came and found me, because he was a man who noticed things, and he had noticed I had gone somewhere alone. He did not say much. He sat down on the bench beside me, at the polite distance men leave when they are giving you room and company at the same time, and he put 2 paper cups of bad coffee down between us, and he let the quiet do most of the work. After a while he said, "You did it right out there. For what it is worth, anybody else would have taken the kid's head off and been within their rights, and it would have been the wrong thing." I said I knew. He said, "I know you know. I am telling you anyway because you are sitting in here alone instead of out there letting people be glad you are not dead. And I think part of you believes the quiet thing you did makes you soft. It does not. It makes you the hardest person on this base. Soft would have been easy. You did the hard one." Then he drank his coffee and did not look at me while I got my face back, which is the kindest thing one operator can do for another, and I have loved him for it in the plain way you love the people who have seen you at the bottom and never once made you pay for it. I sat there until my hands were steady. Then I stood up, because I had a corporal to see at 1400, and because sitting with grief too long turns it into something else, something that curdles, and I have made a discipline out of standing up before it does. At 1400 hours, Iverson reported to me, and I gave him the lesson instead of the axe. I did not make him stand at attention. I told him to sit. He sat on the edge of a chair like it might be a trap, back straight, hands flat on his knees, braced for me to take him apart, and I understood that taking him apart would have been the easier thing for both of us, because humiliation is quick and mercy is slow, and mercy asks more of the person receiving it than punishment ever does. Punishment lets you off. You pay, and then you are square, and you can go back to being who you were. Mercy does not let you off. Mercy makes you look at the thing you did with no wall of punishment between you and it, and that is far harder to walk away from unchanged. "Do you know why the compound is quiet?" I asked him. "Why the men here do not look like the posters? Why half of them, if you saw them off duty, you would take for accountants and delivery drivers and tired dads at a hardware store?" He did not know. He said so quietly, the sneer of the morning gone completely now, nothing left in his voice but a young man trying to be honest, because honesty was suddenly the only currency he had left. "Because the job is to not be seen," I said. "The whole job. If you can see us coming, we have already failed. The most dangerous person at your gate will almost never be the one who looks it. He will look like a tired man in a coffee line. She will look like a lost girl with a duffel at 6:40 in the morning. The day you learn to guard a door, as if you believe that is the day you become worth putting on a door. The way you guarded it this morning, you would have lost it. You would have waved through the wrong quiet man in a clean suit and stopped the right quiet woman in travel clothes, and you would never even have known which mistake was the one that got people killed. That is the part that should frighten you. Not me, the mistake you cannot see." I let that sit in the room for a while, because a lesson needs air around it, or it does not take. Then I told him the other half, the half that is harder to hear. "You were not wrong to stop me," I said. "Stopping people is the job. You were wrong in how you did it. You put your hands on a stranger and you made a decision about who she was out loud, in front of a crowd, before you had a single fact. A good sentry stops everyone and assumes nothing. He is polite to the general and polite to the lost girl, because he does not know which is which yet, and he knows he does not know. The moment you are certain, you are already blind. Certainty is the thing that got you this morning. Not me. Not the radio. Your own certainty walked you off that cliff, and it will do it again, in worse places than a gate, if you do not learn to distrust it now, while the only thing it cost you was an afternoon with me." He nodded slowly, and I could see him actually filing it. Not to please me, but to keep, and that is the difference between a person who will grow and a person who will only apologize. He listened. To his credit, he listened all the way through, and he did not make excuses, and he did not do the thing weak people do, where they perform their remorse so hard that the remorse becomes about them. He just listened. And when I told him about a corporal named Alvarado, not the valley, never the valley, just the man, just the laugh that was too big for his body and the thing he used to say about who you want on your left, Iverson's eyes did something honest, and I understood that the mercy had reached a place in him that the axe never could have, a place punishment does not have the address for. "Why?" he asked me finally, and his voice was very careful, like a man setting down something heavy. "Why didn't you end me? I put my hands on you, in front of everybody. Anybody else, they would have buried me and been right to. Why didn't you?" "Because I have carried a better man than my anger a long way downhill," I said, "and I am not going to set him down to pick you up. You do not get my grief, Corporal. You do not get to be the thing I spent it on. You get my time instead. That is a far better deal than you understand right now, and one day, if you are the man I am betting you can be, you will understand it, and you will do the same for somebody who does not deserve it either. That is how it gets paid back. Not to me. Forward." He was quiet a long moment, then he said, "I don't understand it, Gunnery Sergeant. But I won't forget it. I give you my word." "That," I said, "is the whole assignment. Understanding is optional. Not forgetting is the job." He came apart a little then, the way the very young do when they are shown a kindness they cannot account for and have not been given permission to refuse, and I let him. And I did not mention it. and I did not soften it or rush it, and that, more than any punishment, was the thing that changed him. I have watched punishment slide off men like water off a slate roof. I have never once seen a person stay unchanged after being handed a mercy they know, all the way to the bone, that they did not earn. In the last light of that first day back, I made a decision about where the rest of my life was going to point. Barrow had given me a choice earlier in the quiet after the gate, walking me back toward the headquarters building with his hands behind his back. I could go back to a team. The door was open, he said, and he meant it. After 19 years, and a valley and a scar under my sleeve, I could pick up a rifle and go back to the pointy end that men had spent a decade telling me I would never reach. And there was a fierce part of me that wanted it, that had always wanted it, that had earned it and knew it and did not see why it should have to give it up now, right when the whole world had finally admitted it was mine. Or I could take the cadre, the instructor billet at assessment and selection, the job of standing at the real gate, the one that decides who becomes a raider in the first place, and choosing, watching the candidates come through, the ones who look the part and the ones who do not, and having the eye, now, to tell the difference, and the authority to wave the right quiet ones through and turn the loud wrong ones away before they ever get near a team, before they ever get near a valley. I thought about the corporal at the gate who could not tell a lost girl from an operator. I thought about Alvarado, who did not look like the recruiting posters and who was the best of us, and who told me on a good day that the people who look least like it are the ones you want on your left. I thought about all the years I had spent being the quiet one that 100 certain men waved past without seeing, and about how much of my life had been spent, in one way or another, at a gate, being misjudged, and about how I now had the chance to stand at the gate myself and judge better. I have carried people down a mountain, sir, I told Barrow. I would like to spend a while teaching them how to climb it, and I would like to teach the ones who will stand on the gates how to see who is really coming up the ramp. I have spent 19 years being the person nobody at the gate saw. I think I might be uniquely qualified to teach them how to see. He did not argue. I think he had known which way I would land before I did. He said that the teams will miss you. And I said, the teams will be built by me instead. That is not a smaller thing. It is only a quieter one. And he almost smiled, which for Barrow was applause. I walked the compound in the last of the light, at home and slightly apart, the way you are when you come back to a place that had to relearn your face. It was a good ache. It was the ache of a person who has decided to stay, on her own terms, in a house that forgot her for a while and is remembering now, one Marine at a time. The buildings threw long shadows. Somewhere a formation was securing for the day, boots and low voices. The flag by the shack was coming down, folded by 2 young Marines with a care that had nothing performed in it, and I stood and watched them do it, because some things you do not walk past. I thought, watching them, about how much of this life is exactly that. Small acts of care done well by young people, when no one important is looking, the folding of a flag, the cleaning of gear that is already clean, the extra check on a friend who says he is fine. None of it makes the news. None of it earns a citation in a file drawer. And all of it, every bit, is the actual thing, the real substance of the institution, the part that would survive if you burned away all the ceremony and the rank and the posters. I had spent 19 years thinking the recognition was the point, chasing the moment the room would finally see me, and I stood there in the last light, understanding that the moment at the gate that morning had given me the recognition at last, handed it to me over a radio in front of a crowd, and that it had changed nothing about who I was, and that the 2 Marines folding the flag were closer to the heart of it than any radio call would ever be. That is a thing you can only learn by getting the recognition and finding out it is lighter than you expected. I would not have believed it from anyone who had not gotten it first. So I am telling you, having gotten it, it is lighter than you expect. Do the small things well anyway. They are the ones that hold. On my way out, I passed the gate. Iverson was on post. He saw me coming, and he stood a little straighter, and this time it was not fear that did it. He had the beginnings of the other thing, the thing that takes years to grow all the way in, the bearing of a man who has started to understand what it is he is guarding and why it does not always look like what he expected it to look like. He did not shove anyone. He was watching the ramp the way I had told him to watch it, as if the most important person to come up it that day would be the one who looked the least like it, and he was right to watch it that way because one day it will be. I nodded to him once. He nodded back, and then, after a beat, he said, quietly, not performing it, just saying it, "Welcome home, Gunnery Sergeant." And I said, "Thank you, Corporal." and I meant it, and neither of us made it into more than it was, which was, I think, exactly the right size. I kept walking, light, my duffel over my shoulder, out through the gate and into the ordinary evening, and I did not look back because there was nothing behind me anymore that needed watching. If you have ever been shoved off a ramp of your own, I want to say something to you before I go. Maybe nobody ever put a hand on your chest, but somebody put a hand on the idea of you. Somebody decided who you were before you had said a single word. They looked at your clothes or your voice or your face, at the work they had already decided was not the real work, and they filed you under Lost Girl, under Just Support, under Not the Real Thing. And they did it out loud, in front of people, and it landed hard enough to move you. I know it did. I know exactly how hard it lands, because I stood on that apron at 6:40 in the morning and took it in the chest, and I have taken some version of it for 19 years. Here is the only thing the morning at the gate left me that I am sure enough of to hand to you. If someone has already decided who you are, you do not owe them a performance. You do not have to prove it on their schedule, in their doorway, with the whole line watching and your heart going. You can stand exactly where you are. You can keep your feet. You can keep your hands open and loose and let them be watched. The truth about you does not live in the mouth of the person who got you wrong. It never did. It lives inside the building, in the file drawer, in the people who know your name, in the work you actually did when no one was crediting you for it. And it has a way of walking out on its own 2 feet and calling you by that name when the time is right, whether or not you ever raise your hand. And when it does, when the radio finally crackles and the room rearranges and the person who got you wrong goes pale and cannot find the floor, be the kind of person who does not spend that moment on revenge. Take their certainty. Leave them their life. It costs you more, and it is worth more. And it is the only kind of winning I have ever known that did not leave a mark on the one doing it. I came home to a place that had to relearn my face. I let a boy shove me, and I called it nothing, because I have carried heavier things than his hand a long way down a mountain, and because the truth was already inside the building, and it did not need me to raise my voice for it. So stand where you are. Keep your hands open. Let the truth walk out on its own 2 feet. It will find you. It always does, eventually in its own time, and not yours. And when it does, be gentle with the ones who did not see you coming. That is the last thing the valley taught me, and it is the only lesson from it that I am allowed to say out loud.